So if we can begin the first speaker in session 2, if I could call on Mertkan Hamit, who is going to talk about Cypriotism as an ideology in between Turkish and Greek nationalism. Mertkan is Secretary General to the Cyprus Youth Platform.
Well, the political discourse in Cyprus, both in the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot society, bases itself on the nationalisms, actually. Even though nationalism played a big role all in the ethnic hatred, again, Cypriotism actually emerged as a new kind of ideology in Cyprus. I am defining it as an ideology because when we look for the major political parties or political groups in Cyprus, instead of defining themselves in terms of class or the political orientation, they have a strong emphasis on the Cypriot attitudes belonging to Cyprus or belonging to the motherlands. And these could be observed in the logos of the political parties or certain organizations and the groups. When I wrote this paper, actually, the main thing that I was emphasizing is after 1974 towards 2010, I am focusing on the last 10 years of the newspapers. Newspapers make a big difference in the people's ideas, especially about the identity and the political views. And there are certain political issues take place in this period. These are the political issues that take place which change the Cyprus problem and the general Cyprus people's life drastically. For example, if we take some of the political decisions taken place by Greek government and its reflections to the Greek Cypriots throughout the last 10 years, taking as an example of Semitic government and the Europeanization of the Greek foreign policy, joint defense doctrine and the S-300 missile crisis, Helsinki summit and reapproachment of the Turkey and the Greek governments, 9/11 attacks and the new understanding of the international order, which makes the terrorism as the first enemy of the country, and additionally, the effects of Annan Plan, introducing of the Annan Plan, the referenda period, post-referenda period with the Papadopoulos and the Christofias, the reflections in the newspapers of all these issues changed the understanding of Cypriot in the ordinary Cypriot man's generally. What I'm trying to say is, while in the early 90s, Cypriotism has an understanding with much more bicommunal aspect. It has much more understanding with the bicommunality. Throughout the process, it's eroded, and the bicommunal aspect become sole Greek Cypriot understanding of Cypriotism. So in that case, when we say Cypriot as a Turkish Cypriot, actually we have an imagined community of Turkish Cypriots, and the boundary is northern part of the island. In the same case, for the majority of the Greek Cypriots, in the first case, when they mention about Cypriots, they have the Greek Cypriot people and with the imagined land of all Cypriot. This is an inconsistency between a Turkish Cypriot's understanding of Cypriot and the Greek Cypriot's understanding of Cypriot. In the same way, I want to mention some of the events that take place in the Turkish Cypriots' lives in the last 10 years. Everything started, the Cypriotism get much and more stronger with the banking crisis that we have in Cyprus, actually, in the northern part of Cyprus. When we have the banking crisis, the trust and the respect to the motherland eroded in a very drastic way. And then, of course, the Daesh regime's harassment and oppression to the opposition played a crucial role in this period. The Annan Plan period was the only way that Turkish Cypriots first time had a chance to represent their will of determination. For the Turkish Cypriots, while it was the protection of their Cypriot identity, for an ordinary Greek Cypriot, Annan Plan was the main threat for their Cypriot identity. If we compare the newspapers, this was the general understanding. Because for a Greek Cypriot, while supporting Annan Plan means that giving a lot of concessions, accepting a lot of settlers, and so on and so forth, which will not make them better off. In the same way, for Turkish Cypriots, accepting Annan Plan means the only way to sustain their identity under the threat of assimilation from Turkey. Under all these issues that we have in this period, coming from the motherlands, actually because of the policies of the motherlands, either Greece or Turkey, and its reflection to the Cyprus, it makes Cypriotism as an ideology, which is antagonist to the mainlands. It is much more antagonist to the understanding of the mainlands and the policies of the mainlands. However, they lose their bicommunal understanding. From this perspective, especially last 2 years, or last couple of years, let's say, while mentioning Cypriotism means the sort of impossible idea of the Cyprus independence, in the same way, it's making a lot of others in Cyprus, like the minorities, the immigrants, the others in the society. From this perspective, as the political left, which is the major supporter of the Cypriotist ideology in Cyprus, is approaching much more to a problematic, or building a problematic relations in Cyprus, because the understanding of each Cypriot community, the understanding of Cypriot in each Cypriot community is much more different than it was if we just take the analysis of 10 years newspapers. From this point, if we could say that Cypriotism ideology has actually a failure, then the people who wants the unification in the islands has to promote or create a new discourse for the Cypriots in order to sustain the idea of unification. And I believe that in order to achieve this goal, the Cypriot-centric populist discourses will not be helpful. Instead, building much more collective understanding of the unification and building an understanding based on the classes, based on the rights, or maybe the human rights, would be much more beneficial for the future of the island. That's what I want to say in general.
Thank you very much, Mertkan, for that contribution. I'd like to now call on Tabitha Morgan to give the second case of the session. Tabitha's paper is looking at understanding the betwixt between the Cyprus identity crisis. Tabitha is an author and a freelance journalist reporting on Cyprus mostly for the BBC.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, I recently reached that age where I can't read anything without glasses. There's going to be a lot of fiddling about. Okay, what I would like to talk about is something that I don't think has really been touched on hugely in terms of studies of Cyprus and Cypriotness. And that is one of the least tangible legacies of British colonial rule 50 years on since that ended. And that legacy is a persistent sense of doubt about who Cypriots actually are, particularly on the part, I would argue, of the Greek Cypriot community. It's a sense of doubt and confusion that came to characterise British rule in Cyprus, and which I think still hinders attempts to generate a sense of Cypriotness today. Turkish Cypriots the British were fine with, I would argue, because in the colonial mind they could be relatively easily categorised as Orientals. Greek Cypriots, on the other hand, because by dint of their linguistic heritage they should have been the descendants of Pericles and Agamemnon, were always somehow felt to have fallen short, to have been inferior remnants of an illustrious past. it was a belief that took a very firm hold, I think, of the British colonial administrator. One of the reasons for the strength which this belief acquired, I think, stems back to the time of the Ottoman tribute, which I'm sure everybody knows all about. £92,000 a year had to be paid by Cyprus in exchange for the British being allowed to occupy the island. As a result of that, the salaries attached to administrative posts in Cyprus were significantly lower than those in other British colonies. This meant, basically, that the best guys went elsewhere. Cyprus was never able to attract top-quality officials. People who did choose to come to Cyprus, however, were what I would describe as scholarly classicists of independent means, people for whom the low salaries on offer didn't really matter so much. Men who felt that Cyprus, in a way, was already known and familiar. They expected their posting on the island to be a kind of cultural homecoming. I'm talking about Philhellenes, basically, who I think had a disproportionate influence on British comprehension of Cyprus and the Cypriots, but it's basically because they shone out so brilliantly when the rest of the guys were pretty run-of-the-mill. They were brilliant, but in their familiarity with the literature, the philosophy, and the culture of the classical world, they were typical of their class and their time. And this is something that, when I was studying this period, absolutely knocked me for six, and I think it's worth saying. By the middle of the 19th century in Britain, a classical education had become integral to the process by which boisterous youths from the elite social classes were civilized, quote unquote, and prepared for leadership and public service at home and abroad. The appropriation of ancient Greek civilization in particular was a crucial element in the process of colonization. That's not just in Cyprus, but all over the world, providing the colonists with an essential sense of their own intrinsic superiority. So, a colonial administrator who joined the service straight from university and, for example, was sent to Paphos as his first posting, would know nothing about agriculture, would know nothing about the Orthodox Church, the practicalities of district administration. But he would arrive in Paphos ready to govern his Cypriot subjects, having read in the original Greek Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian Wars, the first 6 books of Herodotus, most of Aristotle's Ethics, 5 plays by Sophocles, 4 each by Aeschylus and Euripides, the whole of the Odyssey, most of the Iliad. That's mind-boggling, frankly. Which is not to say that British administrators in other countries, other colonies, would not have been equally conversant with the texts from this list. But the difference, the big difference for these guys in the case of Cyprus, was that the majority of the indigenous population could also make some linguistic claims to the well springs of civilization, quote unquote. So if the commonly held argument goes, a major function of the mastery of classical languages was to reinforce the exclusivity of the governing elite. Here you have these guys rocking up in Cyprus. It must have been jolly disconcerting for them to arrive to administer a territory where their new subjects have already got access to the same secret knowledge by dint of being native Greek speakers themselves, although that is the modern rather than the classical form of the language. And it was against this background, this is the main point of what I want to say, it was against this background that most of the colony's early administrators viewed their Greek Cypriot subjects in particular. So you get a guy like Governor Ronald Storrs visiting Archbishop Kyrillos III and saying, with extreme disappointment, that the latter's knowledge of ancient Greek was so weak it would have been defeated by an average 6th form boy in a competition in classical Greek prose iambics. This inadequate mastery, as it was perceived by Greek Cypriots of their mother tongue, their incomplete grasp of their classical birthright, somehow aroused a particular disdain amongst the colonists that wasn't extended to the more obviously different Turkish Cypriots, because they could be orientalized, quote unquote, much more easily. And you also get a manifestation of this unease about exactly where the Cypriots rank in the imperial hierarchy in a remark which Storrs also noted, made by one of his officials. I understand a white gentleman and I understand a black gentleman, though I don't let him touch me. But these betwixts and betweens I don't want to understand. And in fairness, Storrs pointed out the betwixts and betweens were frequently barristers at law, speaking 2 or 3 languages, playing a good game of tennis and sending their children to school in England. But you do get, in much British writing from the colonial period, an enduring sense that Greek Cypriots were somehow inferior imitations of the colonists themselves. There is a writer called Gladys Peto who wrote a book, Malta and Cyprus, in 1927. And Peto is quite happy to remark with great approval about the exoticism of the Turkish Cypriot servants who wore magnificent Turkish clothes. When it comes to her own Greek Cypriot parlourmaid, however, it's a different matter. She has a much more modest costume, but Peto has all sorts of suggestions about how it should be rearranged. Her hair has to be tied up on top of her head. The unorientalised maid has to assimilate to British sartorial norms. And that's basically the gist. I have other examples. I think it's perhaps a little bit, we probably haven't got time to go in for now. But this is basically what I'm trying to say in a nutshell, was the central problem that bedeviled much of the administration's attitude to Greek Cypriots. They were not different enough for that difference to be celebrated, controlled and exoticised. The maid's undressed hair, the detested native barristers were inherently vulgar, and their mimicry was perceived as presenting a much greater challenge to British cultural hegemony than if they'd been more obviously different in some way. So the link, I suppose, I think this makes to where Cyprus is today is that it contributed to a deep-seated and ultimately debilitating crisis of confidence within the Greek Cypriot community, in particular about its relative place in the world, and it's a consequence. It's a malaise which has obvious consequences for the resolution of the Cyprus problem and the creation of a coherent Cypriot identity. But it also inhibits Cyprus from fulfilling its potential in other ways. And one example that I wrote about recently in my capacity as a journalist springs to mind, and that is the recent competition to design a new focal point for southern Nicosia that was won by the Iraqi architect Zaha Hadid. Zaha Hadid submitted a concrete brutalist design which is going to be completely inappropriate to the sandstone of the Venetian city walls. But those members of the committee who chose her work, who I interviewed in some length, did so in preference to that of Cypriot firms who were offering perhaps more sympathetic designs. They chose it not on aesthetic or even on functional grounds, but rather on the belief that an architect of Hadid's international reputation would inevitably enhance Nicosia's status and prestige. So I suppose I would say in conclusion, 50 years after independence, 6 years after joining the EU, it is time for Cyprus to shake off the legacy of the betwixts and the betweens. It doesn't need Ronald Storrs or Zaha Hadid.
Thank you very much, Tabitha. If we can move on to Mary Southcott. Mary's paper is entitled Using English for a Settlement, Exploring the Language Used on and About Cyprus. Mary Southcott, as I think you all know, is the coordinator of the UK-based Friends of Cyprus.
Thank you. I want to put a healthy health warning over these comments. First of all, I'm speaking in my own capacity, partly as a woman, partly as a feminist, and mainly as an attender of events like this and the reader of a lot of material put out by the PIO, Public Information Officers from both communities. And I came to some conclusions about language which I thought was inappropriate and leads to partition rather than a synthesis, or rather than a bringing together. Now, I don't think that it's my responsibility to tell Cypriots anything. I believe that these things need pointing out so Cypriots think about them and consider them when they're issuing their bulletins. I'm going to start by drawing an analogy with what happened when the Commission for Equality and Human Rights was set up in this country. It came together from three residual groups. One was dealing with disability rights, another was equal opportunities, and the third was the Commission for Racial Equality. And the first thing that they did when the commissions were beginning to think about how they worked together was that they negotiated their language. So they decided things like women not ladies, disability not handicapped, black not coloured. And this exercise, as far as I know, has never been done for Cyprus, between and among Cypriots. So we have a confusion of self-identification, public information office, polarisation, old-fashioned use of words. And particularly in this country, the diaspora tends to go back to the pre-1960 wording, which is Greeks and Turks in Cyprus, rather than anything to do with Cypriots. And I think this is important because although when Dimitris Christofias talked about having a common language, he wasn't talking about English. All official statements that are intended for overseas or intended for the other community are actually translated into English. So the appropriate wording is very important. And I think we need some ground rules for Cyprus on the use of English. And I'm saying, of course, this all needs to be decided by Cypriots themselves. But my observation is that there is language that brings people together and synthesises, and others that divide. A trick was missed, and we have discussed this a bit, when the Republic of Cyprus was set up. There was no common ownership. It was an orphan. We know why. There was another trick that was missed when Cyprus itself moved into the European Union. Because the European Union is predicated on the idea of citizenship. So citizenship of a state, and that state is Cyprus. So we need to sort of think about these concepts. When Stephen Allenbrightis and Meryl Lecce, to continue my talking about the Commission for Equality and Human Rights, were both brought on as commissioners last year, I wrote to both of them to congratulate them, and Stephen Allenbrightis said, "Isn't it great, we've got a Greek and Turk on the Commission?" And I wrote back and said, he hasn't spoken to me since, I wrote back and said, "No, you've got two Cypriots." And the idea that he's a Greek and she's a Turk is not really helpful for the British understanding of Cyprus. The Cypriot diaspora still use the language they used when they came to the UK, and they passed on to their children, and this is why. But Greek and Turk, to the English-speaking audience, if you're trying to address them, means relating to Greece and Turkey. When Cypriots talk of Greeks and Turks in Cyprus, they have already conceded partition. I know that when the Turkish Cypriots talk of Greek Cypriots, they use a different word, room, which distinguishes them from the word they use for Greeks from Greek, but they translate them both into English as Greek. Recently, Greek Cypriots are more likely to distinguish between Turkish Cypriots and Turks in the context of both their legitimacy to be in Cyprus and in terms of who calls the shots in their view. But there is still a confusion with the use of Turkish side, coupling the Turkish Cypriot negotiating team with advisors from Turkey, whereas there is no Greek side in the sense that Greek is involved in the influencing of Greek Cypriot team. So let me deal with this word side. We hear it attached to many, many statements, and when related specifically to positions in the talks, there are sides. But there are other words which do not polarise everyone in the island into two sides, and which makes it clear that these divisions are in the context of the positions of the talks, and not individual members of any community on Cyprus. A senior British politician once was explaining what they saw as their job, illustrating it by salt and pepper. So I'll use this cup and this here. What they said was that here we have the Greek Cypriot side, and here we have the Turkish Cypriot side, and our job is to move them together. Okay? And I said immediately, no, actually there are a lot of people here already between these positions, and you're just pandering to extremism and nationalism if you insist on this sort of definition and analysis. There are those, including Andy Kumi, who wrote the book Cypriots, who say that islands do not have sides, they only have seasides. It may be excusable using side in the context of sides of the Green Line or buffer zone rather than border, which again concedes too much. At least the other side, in a geographical sense, is not a division of people. However, there are other ways of expressing or avoiding the use of the word side. And we can say position, view, stance, negotiator, negotiating position, and just leave it out in many cases because it's intrusive and diversive. There is a trend to call Turkish Cypriots Cypriot Turks from the left in the north of Cyprus, and more recently Turks of Cyprus from their establishment. This is incorrect English, and again more of a confusion with those living in the north of the island where they've come from or immediate ancestry from Turkey and still have citizenship and passports of the Republic of Turkey. In English, the first word is the adjective, and the second, more important, is the noun. So Turkish Cypriots give the emphasis to Cyprus, and Cypriot Turks to Turkey, and Cypriot Greeks to Greece. When I first joined Friends of Cyprus, I was told that the problem was one of sub-editing. i.e., if you're writing an article, you want to get the least words in, you cut out superfluous words, like Cypriot, and so you just use Turks and Greeks. And then I was told that Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot were actually words used meaning Greek-speaking Cypriot and Turkish-speaking Cypriot. And then recently I was told again by somebody here that just means that there's only a language difficulty that separates people. That's not true, because there's a whole culture and history and propaganda and everything else that goes along with it. And then I come to the hyphen. When I was working on a book with a guy who wrote for The Guardian, he said, you don't need a hyphen ever. You either have two words or one word. And that was his rule of thumb. I think that Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot with hyphens actually emphasizes their separation rather than their togetherness. And I prefer to talk about Greek and Turkish Cypriots. There remains these two bugbears which I have. One is mainland and the other is motherland. Although Turkey is the nearest geographical mainland, there is clear need in modern Greece to distinguish between the islands of Greece and the mainland. The use in the context of Cyprus makes no sense whatsoever. Cyprus is not a Greek island in a Greek state, nor a Turkish island, and the use of mainland is almost always unnecessary. Motherland is more insidious in the context of 1974 particularly, and the events of July. I agree with those who say in Cyprus, I'm a Cypriot, my motherland is Cyprus. Using motherland harks back to imported nationalisms from which they came. Turkey is a state, so is Greece, and so is Cyprus. And the problem comes from the idea of the nation-state, whereas Cyprus has much more multicultural nature based on the Ottoman and Byzantine model rather than the Westphalian one. Britain decided that schools should run separately. There was no attempt, we've heard, except in the private sector, the English school, the American Academy, etc., to teach people together and more important, to teach the others' language. And since 2003, when the Green Line opened, more has been done. Cypriots have discovered common words, especially swear words and food, and why their own Greek and Turkish is different from that in Greece and Turkey. The division and more access to Greek and Turkish television programming has a legacy of losing some of the common idioms and words which Cypriots shared. So young Cypriots have less understanding of words commonplace 40 years ago. One Turkish Cypriot friend who was learning Greek realized the difference between his own Turkish Cypriot Turkish and Turkish Turkish was that the Turkish Cypriot Turkish follows the Greek Cypriot Greek patterns in terms of syntax and the order of nouns and verbs. it is difficult for the person from outside who does not want to take sides to adopt any language, to say anything actually, which does not put them in one camp or another. The Greek Cypriot president, the Greek Cypriot leader, and the Turkish Cypriot leader, or the mirror imaging that comes from the PIO in the north, President Dervish Roglu, and Greek Cypriot leader Dimitris Christofias. One is clearly correct, but in terms of talks, criticism is raised if one does not use the president of Cyprus when the role is actually the leader of Cyprus, of the Greek Cypriots, and those definitions are confused. Geography ought to be able to help us, but because of the use of capital letters, as in northern and north, smacks of recognition, it never does. When one does not use occupied areas, one is attacked, but if one uses them, they are immediately signed up as a pro-Greek Cypriot. Equally is definitely a coup in 1974, but do we say invasion, intervention, or do we say peace operation? Those who refuse to call what happened a war because it was a betrayal of so-called guarantors may be right. I believe that the use of pseudo has become endemic and is ludicrous. When it's translated to English, it's a very much stronger phrase than using inverted commas around a word or saying so-called. But the overuse just renders the material propagandistic, and some Rothschilditers reverse the language just to make the point. So, having edited a lot of Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot writing for the Friends of Cyprus, I've listened to much of what emanates from the PIO machines. I have attended, like I said, conferences such as this. I hold the view that the careful use of the English language can help towards understanding and coming together, and translating into English can harm or help, hinder or hasten understanding. But Cypriots, in their attempt to empathise and find their communalities, need to decide what English to use and what English to drop in working through to a settlement which takes people on the island and outside with them. It may be impossible for politicians and government spokespeople to take the lead on this, but other Cypriots, their media, their journalists, can begin to think their use of language for the sake of the island.
Thank you very much, Mary. If we can move on now to Alkan Chaglar, who will talk about the need for UK Cypriots to speak with a single voice. Alkan is the English editor of Southern Postasi. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me. My contribution today is going to be based on my observations over the years as a journalist and in intercommunal work that I've been involved in London with various Cypriots. I'm also speaking in my personal capacity, and throughout I will refer to Cypriots unless I want to specify to one community or the other. I think it's unnecessary to name each of the different Cypriot communities. There are about 5 of them. So, okay, the UK is home to a large Cypriot community numbering several hundred thousand. Cypriots can be found throughout the UK, in particular in London. They come from all socio-economic backgrounds and from across the political spectrum, and are well integrated to British society. Many UK Cypriots are not necessarily economic migrants, but refugees or those fed up with the status quo in Cyprus and what we commonly call the Cyprus problem. The many injustices of the Cyprus problem has resulted in numerous voices emerging in our UK Cypriot community, each claiming to represent the majority. Often these are split along communal. They're split communally. So you'll have Greek Cypriot lobbying that's separate to Turkish Cypriot lobbying in the UK, each seeking their own justice. In such a politically active community like ours, of course, diversity and pluralism are important. It encourages debate, which helps generate new ideas. Yet it is unhealthy and confusing when the voices for justice in our community that are often so similar and that overlap do not or will not work together towards a common goal. What do I mean by similar voices? I'm referring to the thousands of UK Cypriots who believe that Cypriot unity through power sharing can not only work but can resolve many of our problems. I refer to those who believe that a settlement can bring economic benefits to Cyprus and Cypriots, can address the issue of property, isolation, security, and can help us reconcile our differences and confront our past. There are thousands who agree that the benefits unity carries for so many Cypriots, regardless of their ethno-linguistic backgrounds, is good for Cyprus and the region and outweighs the status quo or any alternative Cypriot solution. However, the failure to bring such moderate and peace-loving people to work together is having undesirable consequences in London, where the voice of our opponents, in particular the partitioners, is amplified. This is creating false impressions to all about Cyprus and Cypriots and what we want. Of course, most Cypriots, most sensible Cypriots, can agree that there is shared suffering in Cyprus in the past that cannot be effectively resolved by mono-communal approaches to its solution, but more effectively solved by a shared solution. As Cypriots are UK voters and are targeted by all the main political parties in Britain, the whole issue of our image as a community and the issue of who we allow to represent us is exceptionally important. It is particularly important for those politically active UK Cypriots who agree that a sustainable solution and long-lasting peace in Cyprus can only be achieved through a political settlement that leads to a reunified Cyprus and reconciliation. Most Cypriots can envisage that a second-rate Taiwan model for the entity TRNC or a few upgrades here and there for that entity is not what the Turkish Cypriots really want for their future, nor will it genuinely resolve their problems such as isolation. Equally, we know that issues important to Greek Cypriots can only realistically be resolved with a settlement. Of course, even those who realise the benefits of unity can be diverse, but the reluctance of many progressive UK organisations to demonstrate selflessness and think of the greater good, the national interest, if you like, is perhaps one of the greatest flaws in our movement. Cypriots in Britain seem to prefer to work alone. Of course, there are multiple reasons why we work alone. Many first-generation Cypriots see their associations as their turf, their piece of Cyprus in England. Sometimes generational differences between UK Cypriots results in one generation setting up their own separate organisation. Other times partisan politics gets in the way, gender. Sometimes there is even hidden racism against fellow Cypriots. Not only are these approaches by UK Cypriot organisations a real problem for the organisations themselves, this means that their future will probably end with the first generation that are running those organisations because they've closed their doors effectively. Yet, we have to understand that second and third generation of UK Cypriots who visit Cyprus annually also love Cyprus and are proud of their roots and have much to contribute. The failure to mobilise second and third generation Cypriots together for a common cause is a great loss and will only hinder our organisations from reaching their potential. After all, different age groups have different skills. Second and third generations can be terribly useful in a British context, linguistically too, through their use of English, and in technology. In Cypriots for Cyprus, C4C, a UK intercommunal group that I am a part of with Maria Niafitou, who is our joint coordinator, Andreas Kumi, one of the co-founders, Bedia Hassan and George Beitis. There are nearly 2,000, mostly UK-based Cypriot students supporting it online on social networking sites, which is what young people tend to use. Other organisations such as One Cyprus, One Population have as many young members supporting peace and unity. Although it is positive to see young people and different groups of people contributing in their own way to peace in Cyprus, it is also sad that we have so many duplicates in one UK Cypriot community, all repeating very similar positions. The UK Cypriot community has more lobby groups than one can count on a single hand. While some lobby groups are not fighting for unity and are clearly our opponents, there are those whose ideas overlap who would undoubtedly be stronger together. By not working together, we have a situation where people on the same side fall out over small issues such as invitation to events, who will entertain the Minister for Europe, who will meet President Christofias, who won't. And it's no surprise that very often these groups simply succeed in cancelling each other out. Regrettably, British politicians pursuing votes in key marginal constituencies where Cypriots hold the balance of power have up until recently played along with our divisions as unionist. The UK Foreign Office pursuing Britain's perceived geopolitical interest has been equally responsible. As a result, a silent majority of moderate UK Cypriots have long distanced themselves from the organised community and simply gone on with their lives. With this kind of separation of progressive pro-unity political activity in London and apathy that we have, coupled with with this growing disenchantment of UK Cypriots, the whole process of selling the idea of Cypriot unity in the UK to the government and to anybody else becomes very difficult, if not contradictory. As a result, here in London, UK politicians, the mainstream media and the wider British public often get the wrong idea, rightly or wrongly perceiving that the Cyprus issue is simply a dispute between a pair of usual suspects, the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. Creating this sort of impression to the world by not working together under the same umbrella not only ignores all the commonalities that exist between UK Cypriots, and there are lots of commonalities and there are lots of Cypriots already working together, it also undermines those Cypriots who have for years been working intercommunally. Although there are shining examples of UK Cypriots already working together under one name, organisations such as the Cypriot Centre, I propose that some radical steps are taken immediately by organisations themselves before a solution, before government action, to do this on a much wider scale, where we have joint intercommunal lobbying and joint formation of PR strategies to support that lobbying. We need we don't need more Cypriot organisations. We have enough at the moment. I'm sorry, but we have enough. There should be a moratorium on this. What we need is an immediate plan of action where steps can be taken to merge existing progressive UK Cypriot associations, whatever their background, whether they're Greek-speaking or Turkish-speaking or Maronites or whatever, and to bring it under a single UK Cypriot federation. We need to get out of bad habits. That is to say, working alone with the megalomaniac, the concept that we can solve the Cyprus problem by ourselves, that we don't need help, and we don't need to work with other people. We need to get out of that. We need to quickly get into the habit of respectfully using both official languages of Cyprus, Greek and Turkish, while also making good use of English to argue our case with British politicians and the wider world. We need to be culturally sensitive, something the Cyprus High Commission must, as a matter of urgency, insist upon, where any officially backed Cypriot conference or event is not held at a Cypriot centre or Turkic centre, but on neutral grounds, such as the Cypriot Centre or at a university. As unionists, we must make the term Cypriot inclusive and shy away from petty tribalism. This small list is in itself a great challenge that will require mutual trust, the readiness to share power within organisations, which will require much selflessness and political maturity. It may even require self-sacrifice by some community organisation leaders. But we need to put national interest first. That is important. We need to work together, share information, and coordinate action for us to be stronger and more effective. The Cyprus High Commission, representing the Republic of Cyprus and influential UK Cypriots whose generous funds support community groups, must not lose the opportunity to reach out to the Turkish Cypriots here, regardless of the negotiations and who is in power in the north of Cyprus. The Commission should not only employ Turkish Cypriots to help them reach out to this community, but be prepared to behave more like the Belgian, Canadian or Swiss representatives in London. That is, we need more cultural sensitivity. We need to respect and promote the diversity of Cyprus and make it our official policy. Turkish Cypriots, for their part, must persevere in working with and understanding the Greek Cypriots. Working together in London as well as in Cyprus will make Cypriots stronger and will reveal how our commonalities are in fact greater than our differences. Once this challenge has been met, we as British Cypriots who support unity and peace in Cyprus will be taken more seriously by all and can coordinate our political lobbying and PR more effectively. The importance of speaking with one voice will help amplify the views of the silent majority who wish for harmony, for prosperity, for an end to the status quo, and for Cypriot unity and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alkan. Okay, if I can now ask Dr. Ahmet Djavit An to give his paper, please, which is called Organisers Cyprus. Ahmet is the Vice President of the Leventis Foundation. Thank you.
Before I start to read my paper, I would like to thank the organizers that they invited me here to have the chance to talk to you. Although I sent before here to the British Parliament my view about the situation in the north, and it was reported in the second report of the Foreign Affairs Committee. But even in Cyprus, it's not easy to find such forums so that we can talk together. Although the gates are open, but unfortunately I will end with this sentence that there is no political cooperation in this sense, and it is still lacking. My ninth book, published in Istanbul in June 2002, had the title Kovadis Cyprus. In almost 1 year, the publishing house had run out of the 1,250 copies it printed, and there was a second print run. On the back cover of the book, I quoted Mr. Turan Güneş, the Turkish foreign minister during the 1974 invasion. Let's take the half of the island now, create a fait accompli, and they cannot pull us out from there in 20 years. God knows what happens later. Different generations of Turkish and Greek Cypriots who do not know each other will not be able to live together anymore. Now that since 23rd of April 2003, the contacts between the two sides of the so-called Green Line are allowed by the Turkish Cypriot regime, albeit limited, I remembered the above sentences by Mr. Güneş told in Geneva in 1974, which were recorded by the columnist Güneri Civaoğlu in Sabah newspaper on 19th July 1994. In the first week, more than 130,000 Cypriots crossed to the other side, and especially the younger generations showed a lot of interest in getting to know each other. I was amazed to hear many Turkish Cypriots speaking the Cypriot dialect of the Greek language very well and enjoying the togetherness with their compatriots after 29 years of forceful division. A lot of moving stories were shown by the TV stations and written in the press, north and south. There is a lot yet to be recorded. As many were skeptic about the future attitude of the Turkish Cypriot leadership and the Turkish military authorities, there was a rush to the checkpoints in order to visit old villages and places where the two communities used to live before 1974, before an eventual closure of the gates by the Turkish Cypriot leadership. Everyone knows that the Turkish Cypriot leadership had been a master of provocations in the history of Cyprus problem, and they have not been forgotten. It was very significant that the Turkish and Greek Cypriot working people celebrated May Day, 1st of May 2003, at Eleftheria Square in the Greek Cypriot quarter of Nicosia in the morning, and at Sarayani Square in the Turkish Cypriot quarter of Nicosia in the evening. This was the first time after 45 years. In 1958, after the common demonstrations of the Turkish and Greek Cypriot workers against the British colonial administration and their Turkish Cypriot collaborators, who were pursuing a policy of partitioning the island and trying to create enmity between the two communities in Cyprus, the Turkish Cypriot leadership and its underground organization TMT
forced and threatened Turkish Cypriot workers to resign from the common left-wing trade union PEO. In the months of May and June 1958, the Turkish Cypriot newspapers were full of advertisements stating that the workers supported the Turkish Cypriot leadership policy and no contact with the PO anymore. A wave of terror was started against those who were seen as the leaders of the progressive Turkish Cypriots. 4 Turkish Cypriots were killed and others were wounded by the TMT. Then we lived through the night of the 6th of June 1958, when the provocative bomb explosion went off in front of the door of the Turkish Information Bureau of the Turkish Consulate in Nicosia. The Turkish Cypriot leader, Mr. Denktash, confessed years later that it was not a Greek Cypriot who placed the bomb, but a Turkish Cypriot friend of his. It was a similar provocation to the 6th and 7th of September events staged in Istanbul against Greek properties. The Turkish Cypriot mob started to loot and burn Greek Cypriot properties in the Tahtakale and Ayas Lukas quarters of Nicosia. Parallel to these events, thousands of nationalist Turks demonstrated in Istanbul, shouting the slogan of either partition or death. Dr. Küçük was saying, I quote, "It was not possible anymore that Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots can live together," end of quote. The murder of 9 Greek Cypriots in the outskirts of Göneli village on 12th of June 1958 was another provocation staged during this period. We later witnessed the murder of Ahmet Gürkan and Ayhan Hikmet by the TMT. The 2 advocates were publishing Cumhuriyet Republic newspaper, weekly newspaper, which propagated the cooperation and friendship between the 2 communities of the Republic of Cyprus, and which made sharp criticism of the partitionist policies of the Turkish Cypriot leadership. In April 1965, Derviş Ali Kabasoğlu, the Turkish Cypriot Akel Central Committee member, was murdered together with his Greek Cypriot friend Costas Michaoulis, only because they were trying to foster friendship between Turkish and Greek Cypriots. After 1958, December 63 and the summer of 74, many years have passed away. The Turkish Cypriot leadership went on repeating the same myth that Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots cannot live together. But thousands of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots proved them wrong by visiting each other's side after the walls of shame were opened. The cases of Titin Aloyzidu and Ahmet Djavit An contributed significantly to the decision of Turkey and the Turkish Cypriot authorities to lift the ban on the freedom of movement across the Green Line. According to the newspapers, Turkey was under pressure from European Court of Human Rights that their rulings had to be implemented as soon as possible. The Turkish authorities were forced to give the order to the Turkish Cypriot leadership to allow visitors to both sides of the divide. It came as a shock for both Greek and Turkish Cypriot politicians as tens of thousands of Cypriots crossed to the opposite side to look around and find how the things have changed in the last 29 years. Naturally, people chose to visit their old homes and properties, which they left over 29 years before, and they had not been allowed to visit since. The long Easter holidays were used especially by Greek Cypriots to visit the occupied part of the island with their cars in masses. Some left-wing Turkish Cypriot politicians commented on the opening of the Green Line, attributing this to the 4 big demonstrations of the Turkish Cypriots organized jointly by This Country is Our platform and the Common Vision. Although these demonstrations sent shivers down the backs of the local Turkish Cypriot administrators and Turkish government, showing that Turkish Cypriot themselves were striving for a solution contrary to the intransigent policies of the Turkish Cypriot leadership, there was no mention by the masses of the removal of the movement restrictions across the dividing line. Even the flag of the Republic of Cyprus, which was brought by a young person to the meeting, was not allowed by the Republican Turkish Party officials to be carried. Later, when the belated measures of the government of the Republic of Cyprus for Turkish Cypriot citizens were announced, again the CTP was critical of them, defining them as minority rights. One should remember also the appeal of the CTP to the visiting head of the EU, Mr. Simitis, when he met oppositional Turkish Cypriot political parties, that the EU should adopt the Turkish language as one of the official languages of the EU, even before the northern Turkish occupied part of Cyprus officially enters the EU. Mr. Denktash was quick to thank Mr. Talat for his anti-Greek Cypriot policies in line with his decades-long nationalist policies. No doubt CTP was in the mass media every day and night after the appearance of the Annan Plan, trying to attack the dissatisfaction of Turkish Cypriots from the devastating economic situation prevailing in the occupied north and turning this into party votes in the general elections of December 2003. The same CTP leadership was in the foreground defending the settlers' so-called rights as equal TRNC citizens to cross the Green Line. Not to forget that CTP supported the so-called property rights of the settlers. The CTP leadership was eager to collect the support of its populist policies in the forthcoming general elections by avoiding criticizing the presence of the Turkish occupation army in Cyprus and the population brought to the island from Turkey, contrary to the Geneva Convention, which supported the Turkish Cypriot leadership in all post-1974 elections. Only the indigenous Turkish Cypriots should be able to vote after a reliable census is done, observed by international bodies. The CTP secured the support of the young Turkish Cypriot entrepreneurs and went on to be successful in the municipal elections in the three main towns. A group of pro-American conflict resolution educators and their so-called peace activists supported the continuation of a separate Turkish Cypriot entity in the north within the framework of an overall Cyprus settlement, which would serve the interests of the United States in our region. Those peace activists were well organized in various civil society organizations, and they even tried to form their own political party which would accommodate to the new environment. One must be very cautious in assessing the new situation after contacts began between the two sides. The Turkish colonizers of over 200,000 and the Turkish occupying army of 35,000 are still in the north. The puppet state of the TRNC is still there. The corruption and the mafia-type economic structure still prevail. Any solution or formula which does not comply with the principles of the United Nations and the European Convention of Human Rights and that legalizes the partition of our island should be rejected categorically. The independence, territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the Republic of Cyprus must be restored as soon as possible. The negotiations should aim for a federal and democratic structure for all the citizens of this country who deserve a peaceful life without foreign interference. The complete demilitarization of our island will contribute also to the peace in the region. To establish a joint political party is now on the agenda in order to reach the above-mentioned aims. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. If I could call on Costas.
Yes, very quickly. I think this makes a very good introduction and cuts out most of what I had to say. Thank you very much, because this sorry history which you've just heard has created so much division and so much suspicion in the minds of the ordinary Cypriots on both sides of the dividing line. I'm involved in environmental organizations in Cyprus, and the environment does not recognize any division. When we have a fire in the Troodos Mountains, we have to fight on either side. When we have a fire outside Kyrenia, and there are inadequate facilities to deal with it on the other side, and the south side offers help, and it doesn't, and it's not accepted by the north, it doesn't help. Diseases are going across from line to line. I can go on this, but I think I've made the point. The important thing to me now, really, is not just to keep fighting on the political plateau and trying to find agreement within that, because it's not that easy. The powers from our side are so strong that it is not really possible for either the Turkish Cypriots or the Greek Cypriots or the Cypriots together to fight them. And as an example, I will give Professor Davidoglou's thesis, which he has been propagating since the days of President Özal, which is that Turkey must become a regional superpower. To do this, it must bring under its control all the old Ottoman Empire states, and beyond that, it must make itself the champion of Islam in the area, and so forth and so on. In the same book, he comments that 1974 was a useful event that happened to Turkey. But even without 1974, Turkey must have total control of Cyprus. Otherwise, it cannot fulfill its plan, its overall plan. Now, with that sort of opposition from Turkey, and with all America's and Western Europe's need for Turkey, which is increasing and not decreasing. If we look today at the major transporters of both oil and gas from the Caucasus, from Azerbaijan and all the other areas through that, are all coming through Turkey. We know the importance of oil. America thinks that it can safeguard that oil coming through, and so does the European Union through Turkey, by basically being at peace with Turkey, and therefore giving in as much as it can to them. So where does all this leave the poor Cypriots on both sides? I strongly believe that one of the most fruitful areas where we can work is in the civil society, in organizations not necessarily involved with politics. I found it very easy, for example, to team up with organizations in the occupied area which are involved with the environment, both flora and fauna. We've had joint seminars, we've done joint studies, much of which have been welcomed both by the Cyprus government and by the administration in the north. We have been, the most recent study which we have done, which hasn't actually been published at the moment, is looking at the problems of the remnants of mines which have closed on both sides, where in the Lefka area we have the old Cyprus CMT mines, copper mines, which are polluting the underwater resources of the Xeros and other areas, which are actually feeding Nicosia. And Nicosia, northern Nicosia at the moment, is taking water which in most countries would not be allowed because it has so much the pollution in it. These are ways by which we can jointly work together. We don't get involved with politics in that, in fact trying to avoid it, and this way we're building up confidence with each other. The more we can get civil society to organize across these lines and hopefully have joint organizations or organization which has members on both sides and look after the environment, look after education, look after the civil liberties, look after everything which really avoids having to come into immediate confrontation with Turkey's interests. I think it would be a great help going forward. I don't see this problem being solved tomorrow, I'm sorry to say, and I think really the more we organize ourselves together, the better. I'd just like to make a comment, if I may, to the comment Mr. Chaglar made, which would be wonderful. Some of us, which unfortunately are older than some of the other people in here, like Mr. Jubras here and myself, have had a long history of organizing associations and having discussions with our Turkish Cypriot cousins through the years. And every time we got anywhere, threats came across from Cyprus and killed all our efforts. Is that fair? Yes. It's a fair. So, I wish the next generation all the luck in the world, and I hope that you succeed where we have failed. But the forces, not only from Turkey or Greece or anybody else, are great, but also the political and social forces in this country as well, and as well as in Cyprus, where you have divisions on social and economic lines as well. So bear that in mind, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Costas. We had a lot of papers to put in this session, so as I mentioned, we will defer the discussion of these papers until this afternoon, where we have a lot of time. We've built in a lot of extra time this afternoon. There are only 4 papers to present. The rest of the time will be taken up for discussion. So if you don't mind deferring to the this afternoon. In the meantime, lunch is being served downstairs.